Flex applications can load data in many ways, but in the Flex in a Week training, we will focus on using the Remote Procedure Call or RPC components. First, I will briefly introduce the three components, and then I will compare the data packet sizes that are returned by each of them. Lastly, you will learn about the cross-domain.xml file that is required to access services in different domains. This video will just be a brief introduction and comparison of the three RPC components. You will learn how to work with them in depth in the rest of this day of training as well as in day 3. RPC is based on a service-oriented architecture. The RPC components interact with server environments via service calls to send and receive data. The Flex application calls the services and waits for a response. This model is asynchronous, so the application implements event handling to listen to the returned data. The data is returned from the service and converted into an ActionScript object, which can then be used by the Flex application. The three RPC components are HTTP service to request and send data via the HTTP GET or POST methods, web service to work with SOAP-compliant web services, and remote object to access native server-side methods directly using the binary action message format or AMF services. In the next few exercises, you will experiment with all three RPC components. This is the exercise solution file for working with the HTTP service component. Earlier, you have used this component to retrieve static XML content for your application. In this exercise, you will retrieve XML content from a dynamic Cold Fusion page. You could just as easily have referenced a PHP, JSP, or ASP page. HTTP service does not work with typed data, so any service page that can generate and return XML will work. This training series is software agnostic, since the Flex framework can interface with any server-side technologies that can work with HTTP service, web service, or AMF. The examples that I will use in the videos and that you will use in the associated exercises will use a Cold Fusion server, but that is incidental. You can use PHP, Java, Cold Fusion, .NET, or any other server technology. The way that the return data is used from these server technologies in Flex is the same. If you want to explore more server-specific technologies for how they work with Flex, remember that you can do so by accessing the Adobe Developer Connection and then selecting one of the mini learning centers for the technology. Back in Flash Builder, let's take a look at the type and file size for the return data from this service call. I am opening the network monitor and then enabling this feature. I am running the application to view it in the browser, and then returning to Flash Builder to look at the audit trail. As you learned in the last video, the network monitor gives you much useful information. I am selecting the HTTP service call and then selecting the response tab. You can see that the response size is 14,000 bytes and that the response body is XML data. This is the solution file for the web service exercise. I am running through the same steps to view the response data in the network monitor. You can see that the data for the web service call is also XML, but the file size is much larger at 22,000 bytes. The XML data for the HTTP service call is on the right, and the XML data for the web service call is on the left. You can see that the SOAP-compliant WSDL document is much more verbose than the simple XML data returned for the HTTP service call. This is the solution file for the remote object exercise. Again, I am running through the same steps to view the response data in the network monitor. You can see that the data for the remote object call is in AMF format and is only about 7,000, 8,000 bytes, which is much smaller than either the HTTP service or web service data packets. The HTTP service component is very simple to use since the service calls just needs to return generic XML data. However, it cannot work with complex data types. The web service component is a great option if you are working with a SOAP compliant service, but the XML files created by this method can be quite large. Whenever possible, consider using the remote object component since it works with smaller binary packets and can directly access native objects on the server. You will learn more about using these RPC components to retrieve data and handle faults in the next few videos. You will learn how to send data to the server in day 3 of training. The last topic of this video is the crossdomain.xml file. When you access RPC services with the RPC components, you are connecting to the service directly, which means that you might run into some security issues. The RPC service must be in the same domain as the application that calls it. If it is not, you must create a crossdomain.xml file that explicitly lists the domains that can access the services. You must literally create an XML file named crossdomain.xml and place it on your server. For instance, this example shows that applications in the macromedia.com and adobe.com domains can access the services on the server that contains this cross-domain file. For your next step, you can watch one or all of the videos on retrieving and handling data for HTTP service, web service, and remote object.